When I first met Emily, she was the kind of woman who could walk into any room and make it brighter. We met in Boston, at a small art gallery near the river, where I was setting up a photography exhibition. She was wearing a light blue dress and stood in front of one of my pictures for so long that I finally walked over and asked her what she thought of it. That simple question turned into a conversation that lasted hours. Within months, we were inseparable. I worked as a freelance photographer, while Emily was a travel consultant who loved exploring new places. We shared everything: laughter, struggles, dreams. Our love felt real, pure, and built on trust. After 3 years together, I proposed to her on the same bridge where we shared our first kiss. It felt like the start of something unbreakable. For the first 2 years of marriage, things were perfect. Emily would wake up early, make us breakfast, and sometimes leave cute sticky notes on my laptop before going to work. She was affectionate, caring, and always had a spark in her eyes that made me feel lucky. But then, life started to get busy. My photography career picked up, and Emily started getting more travel assignments. Slowly, the closeness we once had began to fade. We were both chasing success, but losing touch with each other without realizing it. One day, she told me her company was organizing a week-long trip to Los Angeles for a tourism project. She seemed excited, and I didn't want to hold her back. I smiled and said, "Go enjoy it. You deserve a break." I trusted her completely. She hugged me tight before leaving and promised to call every night. The first few days went fine. She'd send me photos of beaches, palm trees, and city lights. But then, her calls became shorter, her messages delayed. When I asked how she was, she just said, "Busy, lots of meetings." I didn't think much of it at first. Work trips can be stressful, I told myself. When she came back after a week, I noticed something was off. She seemed distant, quiet, almost distracted. I tried to make her feel at home again, cooked her favorite dinner, planned a movie night, but she kept saying she was tired. Days turned into weeks, and her behavior didn't change. She stopped looking me in the eye, avoided long conversations, and even her smile seemed forced. One night, I finally asked, "Emily, are you okay? You've been acting strange since you got back." She looked at me for a long moment before forcing a small smile. "I'm just stressed, Ryan. The trip took a lot out of me." I nodded, but something in my gut told me there was more. A few weeks later, I noticed her getting sick in the mornings. She brushed it off as the flu, but when it continued for days, I insisted she see a doctor. I waited anxiously at home, and when she returned, her face was pale. She sat on the couch silently, clutching a small white paper bag from the clinic. "Emily, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice shaking. She hesitated, then whispered, "I'm pregnant." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank. "Pregnant," I repeated. "But, we weren't trying." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know." My heart raced as confusion turned into dread. "Emily, are you saying it's not mine?" She looked down, silent. That silence told me everything. I stood up, my legs trembling, and stepped back. The air felt heavy. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice breaking. She finally whispered, "Someone from the trip. It was a mistake, Ryan. I didn't mean for it to happen." The room spun. My world, once so safe, was falling apart. I sat down, burying my face in my hands. "How could you?" I said quietly. "After everything we built, all the trust." She started crying, saying she was sorry over and over. But the word, sorry, felt empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, looking at the photos of us smiling, the memories that now felt like lies. Every laugh, every promise replayed in my head. The next morning, she tried to, but I couldn't face her. I left for a long drive, trying to clear my head. I parked near the ocean and just sat there, staring at the waves. I remembered our vows, to love, to trust, to stay faithful. And I wondered when that had stopped meaning something to her. Over the next few days, we barely spoke. She stayed in the guest room, and I avoided coming home early. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to hold her and pretend this nightmare never happened. One evening, she came into the living room holding a small folder. "Ryan," she said softly, "I went for another checkup. I need to make a decision." I didn't look at her. She continued, "The doctor said everything's fine. I just don't know what to do about the baby." I finally met her eyes. They were red and tired. "You need to do what's right," I said coldly. "But you should know, I can't raise another man's child." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." Days passed. The house felt lifeless. I couldn't eat, couldn't work. My friends noticed something was wrong, but I didn't tell them. I didn't want the world to know how broken I felt. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Emily's best friend, Sarah. She said Emily hadn't been answering her phone and seemed really down. Worried, I rushed home and found Emily sitting on the floor, staring at the ultrasound photo. She looked lost. I sat beside her quietly. For the first time in weeks, she reached for my hand. "Ryan, I don't expect forgiveness," she whispered. "But please know that I hate myself for what I did." I didn't respond. My throat felt tight. She continued, "It was one night, after a long work event. I had too much to drink, and I made a mistake. I thought I could forget it, but then this happened." I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe her, to think it wasn't intentional. But betrayal doesn't vanish easily. I said, "Emily, I loved you more than anything. You were my world." She started crying harder, whispering, "I still love you." I never stopped. I stood up and walked to the window, staring at the city lights. "Love isn't just words, Emily," I said. "It's choices." She didn't reply. That night, I slept on the couch again. Weeks passed, and she eventually decided to move out temporarily. She said she needed space to think, to decide what to do next. I agreed, even though it tore me apart. I spent nights replaying everything, wondering if I could have prevented it. Maybe I had neglected her, maybe we had drifted too far. But nothing justified what she did. A month later, she came to see me. She looked healthier, calmer. "Ryan," she said softly, "I made my decision. I'm leaving my job, and I'll be staying with my sister for a while. I'm not keeping the baby." Her voice trembled. "I just can't raise a child in this situation. I need to start over." I nodded, unsure what to say. There was pain in her eyes, but also determination. She handed me her wedding ring. "You deserve someone who'll never hurt you," she said, tears falling again. I stood frozen, holding the ring that once symbolized everything I believed in. When she walked out the door, it felt like watching a chapter of my life close forever. The weeks that followed were hard. I tried to focus on work, traveled for shoots, and buried myself in editing photos. But no matter where I went, her memory followed. Sometimes I'd wake up thinking I heard her voice, only to realize the room was empty. Healing took time. Slowly, I started going out again, meeting friends, trying to rebuild my life. One evening, months later, I was shooting a sunset on a pier when I saw her. Emily was standing a few feet away, looking out at the horizon. My heart skipped. She turned, and for a moment, our eyes met. She smiled faintly, not the bright, carefree smile I once knew, but a sad, understanding one. I walked toward her slowly. "Hey," I said softly. "Hey," she replied. We stood there in silence for a while, the sun sink below the ocean. Finally, she said, "I just wanted to say thank you, for not hating me." I sighed. I did, for a while. But hate only made it worse. She nodded. "I'm trying to be better," she said. "I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I let everything fall apart." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, I saw honesty in her eyes. "I hope you find peace," I said. She smiled weakly. "I hope you do too." Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, watching her go, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. That night, As I edited photos of the sunset, I realized something: sometimes love doesn't end in happily ever after. Sometimes it ends with forgiveness, growth, and quiet goodbyes. Emily had made mistakes, but I wasn't perfect either. We both changed, both lost something we couldn't get back. But we also learned. Months later, I held an exhibition titled, The Journey of Light. One of the photos, a silhouette of two people parting at sunset, caught everyone's attention. When a visitor asked me what it meant, I smiled faintly and said, "It's about letting go, and still wishing them well." Deep down, I knew that even though Emily and I couldn't fix what broke, I still wished her happiness. Maybe that was love, not possession, not forever, but understanding. Months passed since Emily and I had gone our separate ways, but the silence she left behind still echoed in every corner of my apartment. The framed photos, the coffee mugs she loved, the scent of her favorite vanilla candle, everything reminded me of what once was. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt strong, other days I found myself staring at her old texts, wondering where it all went wrong. But life had a strange way of pushing us forward, even when our hearts wanted to stay behind. I focused on my photography, taking on more travel projects to keep myself occupied. My latest assignment was in Seattle, capturing the quiet beauty of rainy streets and night reflections for a magazine cover. The trip was supposed to be a distraction, but it ended up being something much more. On my first morning there, I stopped by a local cafe near Pike Place Market. The place was cozy, filled with the smell of fresh pastries and jazz music playing softly in the background. As I waited for my coffee, I noticed a woman sitting by the window sketching something on a notepad. She had auburn hair tied loosely, glasses perched on her nose, and a concentration so deep that she didn't notice the world around her. I must have been staring too long because she suddenly looked up and caught me. I quickly looked away, embarrassed. A few minutes later, when my coffee was ready, I turned, only to find her standing right behind me. She smiled. "You're the guy from the gallery downtown, right? Ryan, isn't it?" I blinked, surprised. "Yeah, how did you know?" "I saw your photo exhibition last year in Boston," she said, grinning. "Your work on city lights. Beautiful." Her voice was calm and friendly, and something about it made me feel at ease. "Thank you," I replied. "And you are?" "Lena," she said. "I'm an illustrator. I work with a design studio here." That small conversation stretched into an hour. We ended up sitting by the window, talking about art, travel, and the quiet parts of life people often overlook. She had a kind smile and a way of listening that made me forget my sadness for a while. When I left the cafe, she said, "If you ever want someone to show you around Seattle, I'm free most evenings." I hesitated but smiled back. "I'd like that." Over the next few days, Lena and I spent time together exploring the city. She took me to hidden bookstores, quiet harbors, and rooftop gardens only locals knew. We talked endlessly, about dreams, regrets, and the kind of love that changes a person. She had gone through her own heartbreak too, a broken engagement a year ago. Maybe that's why she understood my silence. One rainy evening, as we sat near the waterfront, she looked at me and said, "It's strange how pain brings people together." I nodded. Sometimes it's the only thing that makes us see what really matters. She smiled faintly, and in that moment, I realized I was feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Not love yet, but peace. As my project came to an end, I had to return to Boston. On my last day in Seattle, Lena surprised me with a small sketchbook. On the first page, she had drawn the two of us standing by the waterfront. Underneath it, she wrote, "New beginnings often hide in the ruins of endings." I looked up at her, touched. "Thank you, Lena. I won't forget this." She smiled warmly. "Neither will I." Back in Boston, life slowly regained color. I hung one of my new photos, the Seattle skyline reflected in puddles, on my apartment wall. It reminded me that beauty can still exist after storms. One morning, I received an email from Lena. It was simple: "Hey, there's an art collaboration opportunity here. Maybe we could work together again." Without thinking twice, I replied, "Count me in." That decision changed everything. Over the next few months, we worked remotely, blending her illustrations with my photos for an upcoming art exhibition. Our connection grew stronger with every call and every shared idea. She had a quiet strength that inspired me. One evening, during a video call, she said, "You sound happier lately." I smiled. "Maybe because you make me forget the past." She laughed softly. "Maybe that's the point." A few weeks later, I traveled to Seattle again to finalize our exhibition. Seeing her in person after so long felt natural, like meeting an old friend. The opening night of our exhibition was magical. People loved the theme, healing through art. Lena and I stood side by side, watching people admire our work. She turned to me and whispered, "You did it, Ryan." I looked at her and said, "We did it." After the event, we took a walk along the pier. The city lights shimmered across the water. She asked softly, "Do you still think about her?" I paused, thinking of Emily. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not with anger anymore. Just acceptance." Lena nodded. "That's a good place to be." I looked at her, realizing how much she had helped me get there. Without trying to, she'd given me something I thought I'd lost, the ability to trust again. Over the next few months, our bond deepened. We didn't rush anything. We shared coffee, laughter, quiet walks, and late-night calls. She never pushed me to move on, she simply stood beside me until I was ready. One evening, as we were walking through the park, she stopped and said, "Ryan, I need to tell you something." My heart raced for a moment. "What is it?" "I got a job offer in New York. It's my dream project, but I don't know if I should take it." I smiled gently. "You have too. Dreams matter." She looked uncertain. "What about us?" I took her hand. "If it's real, distance won't break it." She smiled sadly but nodded. A week later, she moved to New York. The first few weeks were tough. We talked on the phone every night, but the distance felt heavy. Yet, unlike before, I didn't feel fear or insecurity. We had honesty between us, something I once lost and learned to rebuild. One day, out of nowhere, I received a message from Emily. It was short. "I'm sorry for everything. I heard about your exhibition. I'm proud of you." For the first time, I didn't feel pain reading her words. I replied, "Thank you, Emily. I hope you're doing well." That was it, closure, the quiet kind that doesn't need long conversations. A year later, Lena's project ended, and she returned to Seattle. I met her at the airport, holding a small bouquet of sunflowers, her favorite. She laughed when she saw me. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I wanted to," I replied. We went for coffee, just like the first time we met. Everything felt familiar yet new. That evening, as we sat watching the sunset, Lena turned to me and said, "You know, I once thought heartbreak meant the end of everything. But now I see it's just the beginning of something else." I smiled, taking her hand. "I think so too. We didn't need grand gestures or promises. Just two people who had been broken and were brave enough to love again." Months later, we moved in together. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. We supported each other's dreams, laughed over silly things, and built something steady, something real. Sometimes I'd look at her while she worked on her sketches and think about how far I'd come from those dark days. One night, as we sat on the balcony, Lena said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Emily hadn't done what she did?" I thought for a moment. Maybe I'd still be the same person, never realizing how strong I could be. She smiled softly. "Pain teaches us, doesn't it?" I nodded. "It does. But love heals us." And that's how my story came full circle. Not with revenge, not with bitterness, but with growth and forgiveness. Sometimes people come into your life to teach you lessons, and sometimes they leave to make space for the ones meant to stay. Emily taught me about pain, but Lena taught me about peace. As time went by, I started another project, a book combining my photographs and short reflections about love, loss, and healing. The last page read, "Every ending hides a beginning, sometimes you just need the courage to turn the page." When it was published, I dedicated it to Elle, because without her, I might have never learned that the heart can heal after being shattered. On the night of the book launch, Lena stood beside me, holding my hand as people came to congratulate us. She whispered, "You did it again, Ryan." I smiled and replied, "No, we did it." As the evening ended, I looked around the room filled with laughter, art, and light, and realized I was finally where I belonged. Good. Because the past doesn't deserve your present. I laughed softly. "You always know the right thing to say." "That's my job," she teased. Life after that felt lighter. Our studio grew popular, and people often said they could feel emotion in our work. Maybe because every photo, every sketch carried a piece of what we'd survived. A year later, on a bright summer morning, I took Lena to the same pier where we first met. The water sparkled under the sunlight, and the air smelled of sea salt and new beginnings. I turned to her and said, "Lena, you once told me pain brings people together. But I think it's love that keeps them there." She smiled, her eyes shining. "Ryan," before she could say more, I knelt down and took out a small ring. "Will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, trembling. "Of course I will." The people nearby clapped as we hugged, laughing and crying at the same time. That moment felt like the universe giving back everything I had lost, only this time, in a form that would last. Months later, we had a simple wedding surrounded by close friends and family. It wasn't fancy or grand, just filled with love, laughter, and hope. As we exchanged vows, I looked into her eyes and said, "You found me when I was broken, and you showed me that love can grow again. I promise to never stop choosing you." She whispered, "And I promise to never stop standing beside you." When we kissed, it felt like the final page of a long, painful story had finally turned into something beautiful. That night, as we stood under the stars, Lena looked at me and said, "You know, I believe everything happens for a reason." I smiled. "Even the painful things? Especially those," she said softly. "Because they lead us where we're meant to be." And she was right. Years later, as I sat in our studio watching the sunset, I reflected on everything: Emily, the heartbreak, the healing, the second chances. Life had come full circle.